talking about some aspects of Kabbalah that you might not have heard much about before. We're going to be talking today about the dual nature of the soul and some of the Kabbalistic treatises that deal with this, how it connects specifically to Thelema, how it connects to Western esotericism, even though we don't hear a lot about this topic in particular in Western esotericism. And perhaps most importantly, we will be talking about the very deep mysteries of Muppets. Now, thank you. Before we get started, I always like to do a calibration. We'll do some introductions, and I'll tell you a little bit about my biases and prejudices before we jump in. But before I do anything else, what I would like to know is, on a thumb dial of I know absolutely nothing about Kabbalah to I could teach my own version of this class, where-ish would you put yourselves? Okay, cool, and I think some of you are fibbing. So that's good. That helps me calibrate. I guarantee anytime I teach a class, I'm going to say some things that are going to fly way out into outer space, and I'm going to say some things that you're like, God, Miriam, we've been talking about this forever. So my apologies in advance for those places where I'm a little bit too up, too down. On a scale of I am a complete Muppets fanatic to I have never seen any Muppet in anything ever, where are you going to put yourselves? Okay, is anyone here completely unfamiliar with the Muppets? That could be Muppet movies, Muppet shows, Sesame Street, anything that has a Muppet. Good, okay, we have a cultural context that we can work with, and that's going to be very, very helpful. Because as much as you may not expect it in a Kabbalah class, there are going to be hella Muppets today, and that's a good thing. Very quickly, and I'll give you a longer introduction after we have a chance to meet everyone. I'm Miriam BatAsherah Green. I am a member of the O.T.O. I am so very honored to be teaching in this space adjacent to the Grady McMurtry Library on the occasion of Grady McMurtry's Greater Feast. When I put that together this morning, it made me very verklempt. I also have a long history in a variety of other magical traditions, and perhaps most relevant to this class, I have a degree in religious studies with an emphasis on Jewish studies. So I actually did this academically for a short while before meandering through the mysteries of this thing called life. Before we do anything else, before we even introduce ourselves, we need to do our most important work tonight. I want you to think about any Muppet. Could be Muppet movie, Muppet show, Muppets Tonight, Sesame Street, with whom you most identify or emphasize. So it could be your favorite, but it could just be a Muppet that you're like, yeah, that's the one I feel most like most of the days. And when you know who that Muppet is, who may or may not be pictured, I want you to turn to a neighbor and I want you to tell that neighbor now which Muppet you most identify with or empathize with. And I promise we'll get back to the Muppets later because they are way more exciting than most other topics in the world. If you pick more than one, not a problem. If you're coming up slightly blank, not the worst problem in the world, but we will remember our Muppet later. And part of my sneaky reason for having you tell a neighbor is so that you remember what it was that you thought about right now without any Muppet prejudice that may be introduced by the topics of this class. So now, coming back to our normal reality, we're going to do a quick round of introductions. And I will keep my eyes out for that and try to make things as accessible as possible. Are we back up and running? Yeah.
What's your Muppet? Or who's your Muppet?
Yeah. I think most of the time my Muppet is Super Grover. And I am, as the social justice dungeon master of San Francisco, who's also a bit of a chaos Muppet. I think Supa Groby and I go way back. But there are definitely days, I think, for all of us that we are going to identify with Muppets that are not our usual Muppets. And we may be attracted to people who have very different Muppet tendencies than ours. And we may be irritated by people who have very different Muppet tendencies than ours. And all of that's going to be stuff that we're going to talk about. We will explore the great mysteries of Muppets. I'll be honest, I'm going to skate through things like the tree and the worlds as lightly as possible. I'm going to skate through some quick stuff about the structure of the soul, which is a much more complex topic. Essentially, this entire class is a really extended lead-in to a short punchline joke, which has to do with the dual nature of the soul in classical Jewish thought. As one might imagine, trying to explore the nature of the dual soul in classical Jewish thought is exceedingly dry. And this class actually emerged out of a talk I gave at TOTACon, the Texas O.T.O convention, in, it must have been 2010, 2011 now, in which I was struggling with some very dry material for about 8 months, and then finally came up with an entirely new heuristic to view it through, which happened to be Muppets, and everything came together much more gloriously. So you get to be the beneficiaries of the Muppets. Just quick show of hands, I think I know, but who here has been to any edition of me teaching all the Kabbalah you need to know in 72 minutes or less? Okay, so about a third of us. So I actually do teach a lot of classes on a wide variety of topics in Kabbalah. I teach an intro to Kabbalah class. I teach an entire class on the letters. I have a class on the nature of the triple and quintuple soul. I have a class on astrology and Jewish thought. I am dumping all of you in the middle of my most technical and probably least accessible class, so thank God for Muppets, right? Now I want to talk very briefly, just sort of a quick, all the Kabbalah you really need to know in 5 minutes or less, so that we can tackle this more complex idea of the soul. And what I want to talk about very quickly, first of all, is the idea that in Kabbalah, there exist 4 interconnected worlds that are essentially taking us from the absolute, infinite, untouchable, unknowable oneness through varying densities, we'll say, of reality, until we can get to this material world that we embody most of the time. So the idea is that we start with the endless and the limitless light without end, and we come into something that is as close to us as breathing in is to breathing out, but is also unknowable except in dreams and brief glimpses for most of us most of the time. That becomes more and more accessible through practice. That somewhere the absolute infinite, we can call it the Big Bang if we will. One of the best things about Jewish thought is that you can talk about things like Darwinism and the Big Bang in Kabbalistic books and nobody blinks an eye. Toward the idea of ideas. We'll call the world of the idea of ideas Atzilut. Atzilut just means the nearness. And it's the first of the Kabbalistic worlds. And it's where things get the first potential of breath and fire and coming into the world without any real kind of structure. Beneath that is a world that is still ethereal but slightly more dense, and we'll call that Bria. And Bria is the world of cups. It can hold things, it can hold ideas. It's an emotional place. It has density but fluidity in the same sense that water does. And so it can carry desire, but it doesn't really form desire. It's a world that has vague yearning, but no real intention toward a way of getting a yearning met. And then there is a world called Yetzirah. And Yetzirah is a world of angelic architects. And in the world of angelic architects, we can start to make plans for how to get our needs met. And finally, there's the world of Asiya, which is not a material world per se, but the closest and densest that we have toward material reality. It's the world in which things really begin to take density and shape and momentum to happen in the world. I always tell Atzilut and Asiya apart because we sit on our ass. It took me 10 years to come up with that really dumb mnemonic. I share it with you now. But this idea of Yetzirah, the world of formation, or often it's translated as the world of inclinations, becomes really relevant in the sense of the soul. In the Kabbalistic tradition, Yetzirah is the world of the soul, and as we'll discover momentarily, the soul itself is seen as fundamentally divided. We might want to say divided for love's sake, for the chance of union, right? The other important thing to briefly touch on about the Kabbalistic perception of the soul is that in Jewish thought we do not have a soul but souls. And this is not unique to Jewish thought. If you look at Hawaiian constructions of the soul, if you look at the Irish three cauldrons, if you look at pagan traditions such as the Anderson Fairy tradition, there are a wide variety of traditions coming in from different threads that see the human soul as multiple and in need of alignment on a regular basis. In fact, there are, Kabbalistically speaking, 5 souls. I tend to de-emphasize the upper 2 souls when I teach, because just getting 3 souls aligned is kind of the work of a lifetime, and the upper 2 souls are thought of as transpersonal. But for our purposes, for most day-to-day life, the Jewish conception of the soul has 3 major parts. The first is your nefesh, and your nefesh is your animal soul. It's your sticky one. If you are perceptive to things like auras, your nefesh is going to be fairly close to your skin. When somebody is in your nefesh area, they are really up in your business. And you're probably going to get a little tetchy if they're not supposed to be. Your nefesh is almost like a battery. So when we talk about sort of taking care of, doing self-care, we're often talking about things that are charging up our nefesh battery, right? So it's a part of the soul that is deeply connected with the well-being of the body. The nefesh is really receptive to smells and bells. The nefesh is not super good with language. The nefesh likes things like massage and long walks on a beach and going out in the sunlight and having good food and drinking good wine and having glorious music. Part of why ritual is most successful when we do a lot of smells and bells and sensual elements is because we're feeding our nefesh. We're getting our nefesh on board. An unfed nefesh is an unhappy nefesh. An unfed nefesh is the 2-year-old running around the room screaming while you're trying to do your greater work and talk to your HGA. You do not want to have an unhappy nefesh. So a lot of our work as magicians is literally getting this animal soul, this toddler, this inner child, to use a New Age term, on board with what we're trying to do. Our ruach means wind in Hebrew. Our ruach is often translated as spirit, where nefesh is translated as soul. It's our perceptual body. There was a time in reclaiming where people were calling it the talking self. I don't really love that term because I think it's a lot more than talking. It's all of the ways we perceive intellectually. It's the part of our soul that does parse language, the part of our soul that responds to poetry, the part of our soul that can vision, the part of our soul that likes working with angelic architects to make plans and do things. Our ruach is a big go-getter. Our ruach can talk with your ruach and have these brilliant ideas and manifestations. Our ruach can teach classes and pull together PowerPoints. It's the part of our soul that is able to scan and perceive broadly. That's not to say that it's not connected with the body. My sense, again, if I have a aura type perception, my ruach is around here, right? You can kind of tell if somebody comes into your personal space, but they're not way up in your business, you're probably hitting the ruach zone. It's a part of ourselves that is constantly perceiving. And then all of this is connected to a soul that's called the neshama or the nishma. I like both of those ways of pronouncing it because in Hebrew, neshama would mean something like she who listens. And I like that idea of having my God soul who is listening constantly to all of the messages that I'm putting up through my other souls. Nishma is also the breath. So when I talk about something being as close to me as breathing in is to breathing out, I'm talking about that connection that we see a lot of in pranayama, that we see a lot of in mindfulness meditation, in all of the different traditions that recognize the primacy of the breath as an integrating factor. So I like that idea of the shema, the listening, and also the nishma, the breath in that space. And ultimately, in soul work, we're kind of working toward getting everything aligned, right? It's spiritual chiropractic. If our ruach is running in one direction and my ruach really wants to do the thing, and my nefesh is really busy macking on some girl over there, I'm probably not going to get much done until I get my nefesh sort of back here, or somehow integrate those competing desires. If my ruach is feeling deeply uninspired, it doesn't matter how much energy I've got in my physical battery. Does that all kind of make sense? I could teach like an entire weekend on this. I have a teacher who teaches entire 2-year courses on just this. So I recognize that I'm like hitting a lot of very, very itty bitty little space for the souls. But what I really want to do is get to this idea of the Yetzer. And the Yetzer is a way that the rabbis conceptualized a kind of dual nature of the soul. I think it plays out a little bit in both the Ruach and the Nefesh. It plays out a little bit in both our intellectual soul and our animal soul. But the animal soul is kind of uncomplicated. It wants what it wants, and it's very aligned with the needs of the body. The world of the Ruach, the world of our thinking soul, our thinking spirit, is where we can argue ourselves into knots. And think about a time when you were of both minds about something, or a time when you felt at odds with yourself, a time when you could pretty much coin flip where you were going to land on a particular issue. That's usually a sign that the parts of the Ruach are not completely aligned within themselves. So not only do we have this complication of getting our three souls aligned to get anything done, but we also have the complication of the chariot work of getting out of our own way and getting our natures ready to move in the same direction. And I think that probably 92% of the challenge as magicians is just getting out of our own way and setting a direction to go. When we are having trouble at the level of setting an intention, it's usually a sign that there's some kind of conflict going on at the Ruach level. So the rabbis dealt with this pretty extensively, all the way back to the Talmud, going through the Kabbalistic period to the Zohar, and continuing into modern work today. And this is a part of Kabbalistic work that I really have not seen adopted into the Western esoteric tradition. Usually when I start these classes, I confess to a certain personal bias in teaching, which is that when I teach to a mostly Jewish audience, I tend to dial up my references on Western esotericism because that's what a Jewish audience is not getting. And when I mostly teach to a Western esoteric audience, I really dial up the Judaism, not because I think the rabbis are doing something right and we're not, but because I want to expose us as Western esotericists to a part of the tradition that we may not always get as much exposure to. And as a general rule, I have found that when I was first studying Western esoteric and Jewish Kabbalah in 1994 or so, I thought they were pretty well aligned because I didn't know any better. And the more I studied, and going into the early aughts, I thought that they were really, really different. And I did not understand how these two things resembled one another. And then over the last 10 years ago, I look at things that Crowley wrote, for example, and go, holy crap, that's exactly what Rabbi Akiva said. Wow. So in this case, the challenge is a little different for me, which is literally that I don't see anybody addressing this stuff. The only modern scholar that I'm aware of that is really writing on these topics is a rabbi named Milton Bonder, who's a Brazilian rabbi. It's Niltonbonder. I'm fairly conversant with his work. I didn't draw on it directly for this class, but I want to make people aware of him because he's the only guy I know who's teaching this stuff. He wrote a really great book called Our Immoral Soul, which is
Did you just say immoral?
Immoral. Yeah, I love this guy. And he also has written an entire series of books called things like the Kabbalah of envy, the Kabbalah of greed, the Kabbalah of anger. So he's kind of working his way through what the Catholics might call the 7 deadly sins, and exploring what does it mean. But Rabbi Bonder's perspective, which as we'll see is completely aligned with rabbinic teachings for about 2,000 years, is that the soul's entire impulse, the whole purpose of having a soul, the whole purpose of eating from a tree of good and evil, is to be able to disobey. That the animal soul in and of itself just is going to answer to its own instincts. It's going to answer to its own sense of self-preservation. I think the more we know about the animal kingdom, the less I'm likely to buy that wholesale, but we'll take it as a given for Rabbi Bonder and others for this moment. And that the entire purpose, the whole reason there's a tree there is so that we eat. And the whole reason we eat is because the snake was right and we wouldn't die, would have the veils lifted. The whole purpose is so that we have choice. And that's a very Gnostic idea. It's also an idea that's being written about by modern rabbis, because these things are not necessarily so separate. So, Bonder's perspective is, this is what makes us human. This is what makes us divine. This is what makes us have part of the divine project, is that we are not blind followers, but have agency and have choice. The natures of the soul in classical Jewish thought are called the Yetzer HaRa and the Yetzer HaTov. Yetzer, again, is related to that world of Yetzirah. So it's a formation, or in this case, it's probably better translated as an inclination, a leaning, if you will. HaRa is basically the bad, and HaTov is the good. And as we will see, these are completely terrible translations. And the entire reason I teach this class is because I looked at that and I went, that translation sucks. Let's fix it. Yes?
Could you enlighten us on the Hebrew spelling of HaTov and HaTov?
HaRa is Resh Ayin, and Tov is, my spelling sucks. Thank you. Tet. Yeah. Tet Vav Bet. I'm so terrible. My spelling.
I'm a terrible speller too.
I know, but like my Tofs and my Tets, I'm like, I don't know. I can do cursive for you. Thank you. The term is driven from, and I could have looked here because I've actually got this in Hebrew. Damir, hello. It comes from a phrase, Yetzer Lev Ha'adam Ra, the inclination of the heart of mankind is evil, or bad. And this comes up a couple of times in Genesis or Bereshit at 6:5 and at 8:21. But there's this idea that pretty much as soon as we have an inclination, the inclination has its own opinions. The sages of the Talmud in Brachot 32a, I love the way they write about this. To what is it like, the evil inclination in man? It is like a father who takes his small son, bathes him, douses him with perfume, combs his hair, dresses him up in his finest accoutrements, feeds him, gives him a drink, places a bag of money around his neck, and then goes off and puts his son at the front door of a brothel. What can the boy do that he cannot sin? Right? We are made to be these glorious beings put at the door of a material world that is full of temptations, right? And again, I think we're going to problematize this a little bit, right? The idea of the Yetzer Hara traditionally, it's not a demonic force. Like, here's this idea that we have, that there's the good soul and there's the bad soul, right? Or we see in every cartoon ever. I was originally looking for Looney Tunes, but I found Homer instead. Right? How often do we see this? I mean, we're brought up with this imagery. Bugs Bunny has the angel and the devil on the shoulder giving counsel, right? This is an idea that is fully permeated our modern culture. But traditionally, the Yetzer Hara, it's not a demonic force. It's thought of as a misuse of the things that the physical body needs to survive. So eating, good. Gluttony might be bad for your health, right? As that terrible movie from the 80s would say, greed is good. Greed that destroys our lives and the ecosystem of well-being around us, not so good, right? So there are all of these tendencies that we have as humans, our hungers as humans, our desires as humans, that are part of the operating system. These inclinations are not bad. The choices we make with them may be to our benefit or not. And the choices we make with them may be to the benefit of the people we love and wish to be in community with or not. But the desires themselves are not problematic. There's also sort of an idea that the Yetzer Hara is born with you immediately, and your Yetzer HaTov is something that develops, usually at the age of a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah. So that's why you have those ceremonies at those ages. I think that, again, reasonable minds may vary, but the idea that we have a social conscience that develops over time has some truth to it. And 2-year-olds are not often known for their sense of a greater social conscience. So that's probably fair. And that comes out of O.T.O Rabbi Natan. So beyond even the self, the Kabbalistic idea is not that we're going to suppress our Yetzer Hara or that we're going to elevate our Yetzer HaTov. I will get to you, Carrie. The idea is not to destroy evil, but to integrate and to return things to the source. Whether that's to include the left within the right, which is a Zoharic metaphor, or the Lurianic way of looking at it would be to elevate the fallen sparks, right? That this is an integrative process rather than only listening to the good angel on the shoulder.
Or giving it a translation.
Yeah, Terry, you had it.
Yeah, I also, the language of good and evil comes out of such a Christian culture.
Yes.
And so to recontextualize it away from its Christian layers of meaning.
Thank you.
Right? One of my teachers, Gershon Winkler, talks about how Ra is maybe better understood as where something is lacking or wanting, and where Tov is the state that is like satisfactory, complete and whole in that way. And so that these are the two. Yes, it's a binary still.
Yeah.
We're dealing with a binary kind of idea here, but that what we're looking at is the pull between lacking or wanting and fulfillment and satisfaction.
I think that's not a bad frame. It's not the frame where I've landed, but I think it's a good stepping stone to where I'm going with this, and I like it a lot. That also leads me to I like to play Yenta with books. Gershon Winkler wrote an extraordinary book, one of the best modern Kabbalah books, called The Magic of the Ordinary. I cannot recommend it strongly enough. So thank you, Carrie. Yeah. And I do agree with that. So this, as Carrie was pointing out, this idea, this false dichotomy of good and bad is not helpful. It's kind of the opposite of helpful, and I think it's actually not what even the rabbis intended. As you were saying, this kind of imagery comes out of Judaism to the same degree that the fall comes out of Judaism, which is to say it's not there. It does not exist in the text. That's a Christian theological frame on top of a Jewish text. And I can go on a rant about the fall some other day, but take my word for it that it literally does not exist in Genesis. It's a theological frame. This is a theological frame. So often our work as esotericists and as scholars is to dust away the layers of interpretation that get put on the plain meaning of things and come up with our own interpretation. Very briefly, the entire Kabbalistic exercise is, I think, best summed up in Notoricon, or an acronym, PARDES, which is that there's the plain meaning of things, the pshat. There's the story about things, which is the drash. There's the hints and rumors and winks and fun stories and nudge wink wink, the remez, and then there's the actual secret of things, which is the sod. And everybody, even if you start with the exact same plain meaning of things, the exact same pshat, we can come away with a wide variety of interpretations from that source. And very often, the interpretation that we get in modern Western culture fundamentally misunderstands some of the source texts, and because of that, fundamentally misunderstands Kabbalah, which is why I have a kind of Jewish bias on that. But I'm on a rant and I come back. I do this because I'm a chaos Muppet, all of which will be revealed soon. So the Yetzerim, both of our natures are Yetzirot, are completely critical to our functioning. They're the reason that we are human. Without this tension between our different inclinations, we don't get anything done. And very specifically, and all the way back through all of not just the Kabbalistic, but Talmudic thinking, this idea emerges that if you don't have greed, you can't start a business. Because nobody would be dumb enough, I say, as a small business owner. You don't have lust, you can't start a family, right? You don't have gluttony, you can't provide a solid table. You're not going to bother to make good food. You're just going to make food that functions, right? It's not the inclination that's the trouble. It's how we guide it. So there are other frames for the Yetzer HaRa that I like a lot better. One is the idea of the Yetzer HaRa, the self-care inclination and the other care inclination help to make that kind of value neutral. And one of the things I like, as I look at the Yetzer HaRa and the Yetzer HaTov specifically as that selfish or separating desire and that altruistic or merging desire, is the other potential dance that emerges, which is the two primary directives of the Lemic law, right? Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law is pretty much what the Yetzer HaRa would tell us to do, right? That is the holiest possible directive of the Yetzer HaRa. Love is the law, love under will is a pretty good summation of the altruistic part of our soul, our Yetzer HaTov. Neither one of these can live independently of one another because here there be assholes and here there be doormats, right? We need both. So literally there cannot be one without the other. And you see this too in a couple of traditional texts, and then I promise we'll get back to Muppets. And they cried with a great voice to the eternal their God. It's Nehemiah 9:4. And now I'm going to get into Yoma 69b. What did they cry? Woe, woe! It is he, the Yetzer HaRa, who has destroyed the sanctuary, burnt the temple, killed the righteous, driven all Israel into exile, and still dancing in our midst. Surely you have given us the Yetzer HaRa that we may receive merit through him. We want neither him nor merit through him. In that moment, a tablet fell from the firmament, the word truth inscribed upon it. Heaven is acceded to the request. Then they, the sages of the great assembly, ordered a complete fast of 3 days, whereupon the Yetzer HaRa was surrendered to them. He came forth from the Holy of Holies like a fiery lion. At that moment, the prophet declared, "This is the Yetzer." The prophet said, "Cast him in a lead barrel." He, the Yetzer HaRa himself, said to them, "Realize that if you kill me, the whole world is finished." Good lion. They held him for 3 days. Then they looked in the whole land of Israel, and not an egg could be found. So they asked, "What shall we do now?" So they put out the eyes of the Yetzer HaRa and let him go. Right? So this wackadoodle story is basically saying if you get rid of the Yetzer HaRa, new things stop generating. Sure, you can have your wish, you can cast the Yetzer HaRa out, and you've also cast out all possibility of the world as we know it. Not good. And this is quite literally a scapegoat, right? How often do we want to say, "Oh, I had a bad day," right? If my Yetzer HaRa made me do it. No, honey. Thank you. These are the problems where we're not taking meat, so you can't see me do that. As men became less inclined to incest, but I cut the story there because it
makes sense.
I mean, we put out its eyes, it got a little better. Okay, done. The texts are a little weird, especially out of context. The Genesis Rabbah teaches something that I find quite interesting. So the Rabbah says, God saw all that he had made and found it very good. V'hine tov ze yetzer HaTov, v'hine tov meod ze yetzer HaRa. He found was good the Yetzer HaTov, but he found very good the Yetzer HaRa. So again, this idea that what has fulfilled the plan, right, is that we as humans are co-creators in the process. We are not just some kind of blind robots put out on the earth, but are co-creators and co-participants in the divine program. And we do that by eating the tree and by having a sense of right and wrong, and by having a sense of, I'm going to say not right and wrong, having a sense of self-interest and other interest, and being able to balance those at any particular moment in furtherance of this world that we co-create, because there is no part of me that is not of God's. We get to co-create this thing. So back to Muppets. We love Muppets. Hi Muppets, I missed you. Oh my God, you're so much more fun. So I was preparing this presentation for the first time in fall of 2012. And based on everything I was just saying, I was really struggling. I'd been working on this class and pretty much nothing but this class for about 8 months. I was maybe 2 or 3 weeks away from TodaCon, and I still felt like there was no real way to get across in a value-neutral way this dual nature of the soul, because I do believe that the dual nature of the soul is real, that the dual nature of the soul impacts our efficacy as magicians. It impacts our efficacy as people in the world, aka magicians, and where we are able to find alignment and balance, we tend to be more effective, and where we are not in an intentional alignment or balance, we tend to be less effective. So, you know, I was really struggling because I'm trying to deal with this false dichotomy that is usually translated as good and evil as a Thelemite who prays, save me from evil and from good. Now what? So then Dahlia Lithwick published a lovely article in Slate that fall that would change my life. And the archetypes. It is still available on Slate. It is very simple and silly. I recommend it highly. I don't know if Lithwick knows a damn thing about Kabbalah. I would venture maybe not. But here it was. Finally, I had a unified field theory that helped me make sense of how to explain the two inclinations of the soul without resorting to false dichotomies or superstitious balderdash. So Lithwick describes Muppet theory as a little-known, poorly understood philosophy that holds that every living human can be classified according to one simple metric. Every one of us is either an order Muppet or a chaos Muppet. Okay. So, I want you to think back to your natural Muppet choice. And, you know, there are many spectra in life, right? If anybody knows about, introversion or extroversion theory, there are hard introverts and there are soft introverts. There are hard extroverts, there are soft extroverts. We're all somewhere on a scale. There are hard chaos Muppets and there are moderate chaos Muppets. But in this case, what I would invite us to think about is the general tendency toward wanting things to be somewhat orderly and interconnected and everyone playing nice in the sandbox, and a sense of discomfort when that doesn't happen, and a sense of wanting to shake things up and hit them with a hammer and put things on fire and woo! And some chaos Muppets are very happy. So order Muppets. These guys are all order Muppets. Some of them are very happy. Some of them are a little grumpier. This poor blue guy, he's constantly taking orders from Grover, and it's never, ever good. That poor guy, he is like the uber order Muppet who is constantly having to deal with everybody else's chaos. Poor blue waiter guy. I feel sadly for him. Bert is a very nice, happy guy who just wants to be able to go to bed without Ernie eating cookies in the next bed. Is that too much to ask, really? Oh. Sam the Eagle, he is an order Muppet, but he knows how to have fun, right? Sam the Eagle went out and sang karaoke like really drunk on TV recently. So, I mean, you know, he can have fun. Our bear friend down here works as a security guard. He keeps people safe. He uses his order powers for good in service of that. You two, over here in the corner, you're maintaining a certain kind of order. You're watching to make sure that this Chaos Muppet teaching class doesn't say something too very fucked up. I haven't been heckled once yet, and I'm Kermit is constantly holding the entire world together. And Kermit does not ever look like an order Muppet, because the world is never going according to Kermit's plans, and he's doing this! But he's doing this because he is an order Muppet, and he needs the world to be orderly and held together and functioning for a kind of greater good. And when that doesn't happen, he's unhappy. I've gone through a great deal of debate recently, and I've pretty much decided that Beaker is in fact an order Muppet for the same reason, because Dr. Bunsen is driving Beaker absolutely bonkers by setting things randomly on fire all the time. Jack Parsons is definitely a chaos Muppet, right? The rest of the early jet propulsion laboratories, definitely order Muppets, right? This is why Caltech wasn't quite sure to do with our friend, right? So there, you know, I would say Israel Regardi might be a bit of an order Muppet, right? So we have a wide spectrum of inclinations toward being an order Muppet, but generally, if you have chosen an order Muppet, your Muppet likes things to be structured, your Muppet likes to think about the impact on everybody, right? Our dudes up here are being grumpy because they think the show is sucking for everybody, right? They're thinking about the greater good, yes.
So my question for you now is, how can you not classify Fozzie Bear as an order Muppet?
Oh, come on. Really? Really don't.
I think Waka Waka Waka, I think he's a light chaos Muppet. I don't think he's a heavy chaos. He's not an animal. He is probably the chaos Muppet to Kermit's light order Muppet. But reasonable minds may disagree. Reasonable minds may disagree.
Like he did recently steal something just for the sake of stealing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, and, the thing is, like, here's our friend Gonzo. Now, our friend Gonzo, some people may know, recently got a job running a very large plumbing company. He wears suits these days. He also still really likes shooting things out of cannons and has no higher aspiration than having a harem of chickens. Gonzo, no matter how much, I actually identify with this pretty well. During my days as a consultant, I was probably Gonzo in a suit, right? Super Grover, he wants to bend bars and come out and save the world, and he's lovely and fuzzy, adorable old Grover, and he's kind of all over the place. Ernie, he really just wants to eat cookies in bed. He doesn't understand why it's a problem to eat cookies in bed. I mean, it might annoy other people, but it makes him so happy. He feels very happy. He loves his rubber donkey, too. He loves his rubber donkey. So the Chaos Muppets of the world can be very successful people. Not to say that our Order Muppets can't, because we have some very successful Order Muppets here, especially Kermit, who runs the entire show. But, you know, we have chefs, we have scientists, we have divas, we have whatever the hell animal is.
Musician.
Rock star.
So,
Rockstar.
or Chaos Muppets kind of like to be watched. I think Chaos Muppets are not universally extroverted. They may be a little bit more extroverted. They tend to be blue. They tend to be fuzzy. They tend to really like indulging the senses, right? We are all a little bit Chaos Muppet. We are all a little bit Order Muppet. The reason we did the exercise at the beginning is I think it's a way of, among many, you can do, you know, some people like Myers-Briggs, I like Muppets. It's a way of sort of figuring out where's our comfort level to begin with? Where might we want to dial in a different direction? Somebody who is so far on the Order Muppet spectrum that any form of innovation or creativity is terrifying, is going to have problems with certain kinds of the magical project and innovation. Somebody like Animal, I suspect that Animal's daily practice is a little bit chaotic. I don't think Animal is probably keeping a magical diary. I suspect Animal has a hard time sitting on the meditation cushion without eating it or setting it on fire, right? So there are tendencies that may want to be counterbalanced in our personal magical project. There is nothing HaRa about being a Chaos Muppet, and there's nothing particularly virtuous about being an Order Muppet. They're just tendencies. So one of the things that Dahlia Lithwick talks about in her unified field theory is not just how we balance on ourselves. In fact, I don't think she talked about that at all, but how often we are, thank you, attracted to individuals that complement our natural tendencies. Recognizing that the Muppets are scintillating topics and we could talk about this forever. Well, it's true. It's true. So I had a couple of questions come up during the sharing time that relate to how I was planning to wrap up, but I also want to sort of deal with that head on. Just out of curiosity, was this useful for anyone? Did exploring the souls in this way help? Was it super annoying? From annoying to helpful? Can I get a thumb dial to just sort of see? Okay, cool. So we were talking about the pardes, right? The pshat, the drash, the remez, the sod. We're all starting from the same plain meaning. We're all pointing to something that is ineffable, right? This class is brought to you by the letters Aleph, Mem, and Shin. But, we're all still architecting our own world, right? I love that so many of you got that joke. Thank you so much. But in all seriousness, we're working from one plain meaning. We're all pointing at something that is ineffable to each of us. And our drash, our story around that, our remez, the hints that are useful to us, are going to be really different for everybody. So my goal in this class is really not to come up with some new orthodoxy of the Muppets. I just happen to like having a good whack on the side of the head to look at things through a different frame. And because I myself am a chaos Muppet, I really love the idea of just shaking Kabbalah up and getting it out of its stodgy box and saying, if we look at it through this. So, my goal at the end of the day is to get us away from this and to find a frame to get us away from this. And then my other goal at the end of the day is to make you aware that there's this entire theory of the soul in Kabbalistic and pre-Kabbalistic thought that we don't really look at, and that particularly for those of us who are doing triple soul work, or those of us who are working with the model of the Jewish soul, this is a part of the operating system that you will run into that you might want to be aware of. And it is not a bug, it's a feature, right? So, we need to be aware of this. We need to be aware that this is something that magicians and rabbis have been working with forever, and we're just not talking about it anymore. And I'm surprised that we're not talking about it. And at the same time, I think part of why we are not talking about it is that this model of the angel and the devil on the shoulder does not work. The thelemic model does work. The thelemic model of looking at the primacy of will and the primacy of love under will, I think that does work, but we don't think about tying it back to the natures of the soul. It's a line that is there to be drawn, and we have not drawn it. So that's what all of this is about for me, is drawing that line, making people aware that there is this entire line of thought to be explored, to let you know when you run across the terms Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer HaRa, think about all this other stuff. Let's get beyond good and bad, let's get beyond good and evil, and let's look at something a little bit deeper. So one of the questions that came up during the little discussion break was, well, I don't really identify with any of these. Is that a problem? And my answer is no. And that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be that you're at a kind of middle point already. It could be that my frame is not resonating, and that this frame of the Muppets itself is just not landing. It could be that you're coming at a position that is fairly balanced between the selfish or separating inclination and the altruistic or connecting inclination. And then a similar question came up, do we age out of this? I think that's not a bad question at all, because I think it's not aging out of, because I've seen a lot of people, as they become older, become much more rigid, right? We don't automatically become less rigid, but practice makes us less rigid. Yoga makes us less rigid. Magic makes us less rigid. Meditation makes us less rigid. So having a very firm identification with a particular identity construct of any kind is something that the magical work and process, the spiritual process, is going to rub off over time. So yeah, that could be, and I think it is for many people. You know, the question was, well, aren't we all Chaos Muppets when we're 16? Maybe. I also know a lot of people who are 16 and trying very desperately to hold on to a sense of order and are extremely rigid. And what the spiritual practice seems to do, in my opinion, and particularly the work of lodge and the work of community, as we all rough and tumble against one another over time, is all of our rough edges start coming off. We get more flexible. We get more self-balancing. We know that we might need more order in our lives, and we get pretty good about creating structures for that. We know we need to loosen up, and we create structures for that. Space for that, thank you. You may be a Chaos Muppet. But I thought that both of those were excellent questions, and I really appreciate the people who brought them to me. Because, you know, my goal is not that we somehow, like, find our perfect Muppet and become the essence of that Muppet. My goal is that if this is a useful model, we recognize what our sort of natural tendency is and where that has strength, because every single one of these does, and where the limitations might be, so that we can come to balance, so that we can be at that point in Libre where we are standing balanced and we are able to act effectively in the world. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Cool. I would like to open the floor to a few other burning questions, briefly. Yes?
Can you just briefly go through the tree and describe why you put each Muppet that you did on a different separately?
I would love to do that, but Brother Ben did it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this as my test. I'm going to give you my best guesses, and I'm going to let Brother Ben correct me where I am egregiously wrong, because I just happen to like the image a lot, really. I'm going to tackle a few easy-ish ones, and then there are a few where I'm completely lost. Fozzie the Bear is just an everyman, right? So Malkut is the kingdom, right? Malkut is where things are generally, it is not the world, but it is where things are intersecting with the world in a spiritual frame. Malkut is balanced. It's, you know, earthy, but it's also got the four elements. And it's also got the opportunity for fun and levity. Waka, waka, waka. Fozzie the Bear, he's just a bear. He's a natural bear, and he gets things done. And he can go on a road trip across the country, and, you know, when you're moving right along, you don't want Kermit driving. They never would have gotten to California. If you are way too young for the first Muppet movie, I apologize. That was all very funny. I'm a skip animal for a second. Beaker is very scientific. Hod is the realm of Mercury, right? Hod is the realm of all things science and logic and whatnot. While Dr. Bunsen is technically supposed to be in charge of the show, Beaker is actually the order Muppet holding that lab together. Beaker is flipping out because Dr. Bunsen is doing some weird-ass shit that he probably should not be doing. I am once again swearing on a recorded BSO thing. Sorry! So that's Beaker. Piggy and Netzak, do I even need to say anything? I mean, she is Venus. She's your fire. She's your desire. Big Bird holds it all together. Everybody loves Big Bird. Big Bird is holding the entire Sesame Street in integration. Big Bird can get factions of Sesame Street, which otherwise, you don't know this, would be a very, very war-torn place. And Big Bird holds it all together by the power of sacrifice and compromise. Big Bird is also the only one that can see Snuffleupagus, who I might put into art as an imaginary, but not imaginary, Muppet. He's a grave mistress. So Kermit just loves everybody. Kermit has a great sense of loving kindness, right? Kermit is the spirit of chesed. Now sometimes Kermit's deep love of everyone is going to cause a little bit of distress. But that is the way of chesed sometimes, right? Chesed is the gedula, the bigness, the expansiveness of spirit. And Kermit just wants to put on a show. There is no greater expansiveness of spirit than that. I'm completely BSing this entire answer. So over here we've got Geburah or Din, right? Din is judgment, right? So Chesed and Din, or Gedula and Geburah, if you want to get all technical about this stuff. And so the power of Din is the power of judgment, where our friend Oscar the Grouch is. The power of Geburah, the mighty grumpiness, is with him. I believe that he in there has my other favorite Muppet, who I don't align with, who is Moishe the Grouch from HaTov Sumsum.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. They sit in there and they just kvetch about everybody on Sesame Street all the time. Also, if you ever want to learn Hebrew, watch HaTov Sumsum.
Really
it is the best ever. Now, see, I think the Count is a secret Kabbalist. The Count understands things. And of course, Bina is the realm of understanding, right? So the Count is seeing the grave mystery of it all. And the Count is really laughing, ha, 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 because the understanding has given him great sadness. And he recognizes the human tragedy in which we all participate. Ha, ha, ha. And then my friends in Texas are going to be so glad you taped this. What greater wisdom do we have when we look at Chokmah than the love of friends through the unitedness of our oppositeness? And moreover, when we look at Chokmah, we are looking at the first differentiated point, right? So in Keter, everything is still undifferentiated. You're still connected to the three veils, and you're still connected to the great limitless. But once we go into Chokmah for the very first time, we have the wisdom of the ability to separate and reintegrate. We have the wisdom of dividing for the sake of union. And if there are two gay boys any more divided for the sake of union than Bert and Ernie, I don't know who they are. Now, getting back to Animal, and then I will let Brother Ben tell me if I'm completely off base here. Yesod is an interesting place because Yesod is the land of our reflections, right? And ideally, we would all like to believe that our reflected world is peaceful. When I think of Yesod, I think of mirrors and waves and the moonlight on the waves and beautiful purpley things. Maybe there's some Prince music in there. It's a beautiful place, Yesod. But the fact is that for most of us, particularly early on the path, Yesod is kind of a terrifying land. Yesod, because it is the land of reflection, is going to be filled with whatever happens to be there. And usually it is the stuff we have not examined very closely yet. So we get to the land of Yesod, and it's our first step on the path. It's our first step into the magical foray. And we have amazing godlike powers because we are above Malkut. Hot damn! Eat things, beat drums, eat drums, right? We're up there with amazing godlike powers. We are also very close to a very scary little intersection on the tree, which is the intersection of Samek and Pei, right? So we're at that intersection of, like, right up here is the intersection of the prop on which we sit that holds all of our balance, and Pei, the open mouth, breathing fire that is the tower card. I think he's very well placed. Had to think about it for a few minutes, but I'm going to go with that. Brother Ben, am I completely off base here?
No, that was really good.
Reshit HaGilgalim.
Huh?
Of course, Reshit HaGilgalim.
There you go. Yeah. The beginning of the Great Return. Ways. And of course, Jim Henson. I mean,
The creator.
He's the creator. I mean, what else are we going to do up there? Yeah, I liked that question, not least because it put me through my paces a lot. The very first time I taught all the Kabbalah you need to know in 72 minutes or less, I was challenged to create a 72-minute class on one day's notice with none of my books. So that just put me through the same feeling, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Other questions? Yes?
I was just going to say that I think it's fitting that Fonzie's the reflection, desperately trying to be funny and create something joyful, and oftentimes feeling like it's just going waka waka waka.
These
Just silent.
create mysteries. I think you may have unlocked the secret idea. Yeah, I actually had the great fortune of going to the Jim Henson Studios a few years ago, and I swear to God, I did not do this as a Muppet addict, but there were so many great pictures of him essentially embracing his creations. It was pretty awesome. Other questions or challenges? Yes.
Can we talk a little bit about
Yeah.
you had mentioned Snuffleupagus as being on Doth Baby as imaginary and non-imaginary.
Yeah.
I'm still kind of on the question that someone had asked earlier, just Doth, why?
Thank you.
Yes, that was
So, Eric, unpack for me why.
Well, I had to boil it down to that because it's so complicated. I mean, for one thing, is Dot seemed to be sort of more embraced in Western esotericism, and in the Judaic stuff that I read, they really didn't care much about it. It's like, to me, it seems like you create this whole thing that has, the magic of the 10 numbers in it. You've got this whole thing that's constructed, balanced and even and perfect. Mm-hmm. It's got all of the manifestations of the right, the left, and the temperate, and it's got equal numbers of each. And then you throw in this other thing just because? Why? Why even bother? Why put that in the mix?
Okay, that's fair. I mean, is it in the Jewish? Yes, no. Ask one non-rabbi, get 13 answers.
This is Chabad.
Huh?
Chabad.
Yeah. So where I'm going to go with this is a couple of different directions at the same time because I'm a chaos Muppet. One of which is that it's really fascinating because I'm starting to see this glyph of the tree show up more with Jewish authors, with our placement of the letters and everything. But there are like, this is not the only glyph of the tree. It's certainly not the most traditional.
Right. There's the grove.
So, I mean, if you go far enough back, you're going to see trees that are literally just like little branches off of one central thing. You will see glyphs that look more like this but have different placements of the path. I tend to work simultaneously with both trees. I don't even pretend to have all of the positions of the letters on all of the alternate trees memorized. But for example, one of the things that I use quite frequently from one of the more traditional Jewish trees has Aleph, Mem, and Shin as our counterbars, which for me makes an awful lot of sense. The more I work with the mother letters, the more that makes sense to me for that situation. And then I go back to letting Aleph, Mem, and Shin live where they do on this tree. So like are things where they are on the tree, blah. Da'at, why? The idea of sacred sexuality and sacred union is huge in Jewish esotericism. Not just Jewish esotericism, but just Shabbat, right? The idea of the Sabbath bride, the idea of Havdalah, all of these things that we do to honor, hey Neil, I didn't even see you come in. All these things that we do to honor sacred sexuality are there. When I think about da'at, I think about every time I chose the wrong verb for to know in my Hebrew class and my Hebrew teacher blushed a deep crimson purple. When you use this verb of to know, yodeat, to talk about a person or saying you knew them in the biblical sense. You shtupped them, right? So if I talk about da'at, I cannot separate that from a kind of gnosis or sexual intimacy or deep knowing from that context. So I know and this is my own personal stuff, right? I can't root this in a particular rabbi or say, Milton Bonder said blah, blah, blah. But for myself, there's a real profound intimacy about going through, crossing the abyss, putting everything on the line, and having that be the kind of intimate, sacred knowing that can blow your sense of separateness apart. So when I think about why da'at for me, I think about crossing the abyss and that deep sexual intimacy that is implied by that word. I also like the idea of, knowledge is a false trap, and understanding and wisdom are real, and knowledge is not, therefore it's invisible, blah. That is also useful, but it has since become less and less intimately useful to me over time. So for me, like that for me is the redeeming reason to think about having da'at there. But again, ask 12 other practitioners, I'm positive you'll get 27 other reasons. Yeah.
I have a question about the tree itself. The thing is, for me, and it applies in Taoism and other things, why as individuals can't we form our own tree that have its own branches as individuals and still relate to the whole?
Chaos Muppet, you say.
Well, and I will put that question.
I can apply both.
I will put that question right back on you. Why can't we indeed?
There is no reason not to.
No, and I mean, all of these are glyphs that have proven useful toward pointing, again, we're going from the plain meaning to the sod. The story you tell yourself and the hints that get you there on the path to mystery are highly individual. So that's the one answer. Indeed, why not? Go forth, make your tree. The other side of it is that people have been doing this stuff for millennia, and they actually have learned something that's useful. I am a chaos magician, but as a chaos magician, I consider myself a hacker. So it's useful to know the actual code, the actual programming language, the actual assembly language that's gone before. I think having a depth knowledge, it's kind of like jazz. having a depth knowledge of scales and musical theory and musical structure Miles Davis wasn't just making it up. He had a deep knowledge of musical structure that allowed him to come up with the kind of jazz. So I think it's a both and. And I think, Ken Wilber would say the both and that you come up with early in the journey and the both and you come up with after you've learned a bit are going to be pretty different from one another. I recognize that I have been a Chaos Muppet and I've run way over time, even though I was convinced I wouldn't have enough material to even do an hour. I want to thank everybody from Blazing Star Oasis for making this possible. I want to thank all of you for engaging so deeply in the class. I want to remind you that the Dharma and the law are free, but the electricity is not. If you would like to make a suggested $5 donation to Blazing Star Oasis using the handy donation basket that is floating in the air back there, you may do so and are encouraged to do so.
Thank you, you're hired.
Thank you. I also just want to briefly let you guys know, in addition to being the world's most dilettante Kabbalist, I am a proud co-owner of a little war engine I call Wicked Grounds in San Francisco. And 2 days from now will be the Sex Magic Coffee Social that we hold the second Thursday of every month there, which I use as a lure to get my various thelemic and magical friends into the shop. It is co-sponsored by Blazing Star O.T.O, to whom I am very grateful. And if anyone wants to come out either this Thursday or any second Thursday to get some magic on in the city, you are warmly invited to do so. And that's my spiel.